What's going on, beautiful J4 family and community? Hope your Tuesday evening is going smooth and well and grooving and lining up just the way you wanted. That today was a good day, to quote Ice Cube. Today I'm calling the show Biracial and Mixed Race Musings. As you all know, I've been in the biracial space for a couple of months now, enjoying the subject matter. The page is themed raising beautiful black and biracial children with a particular emphasis on sons. There's countless content on J4 conversations of a bit more specificity and topical matter. But today I just kind of wanted to keep it open-ended. Usually I have an outline that I'm speaking from, notes that I'm talking about based on some research that I did. But tonight, for however long, whether it's 10 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever the case may be, I just want to muse, y'all. I just want to muse, want to get a pulse from the beautiful community, see how folks are doing, what's going on in their life. It could be anyone, but, in the title, want to hear from biracial folks, man. How are things going for you personally? How are things in your world? If you are willing to share some testimony about growing up, what have been some positive experiences for you, and what have been some challenging experiences for you? Biracial sort of lives in a duality in some instances, even though there's been historical pressure of sorts to line up with a monoracial community, which was certainly my path. But even in a modern era now, biracial folks are vacillating, right? A lot of group membership comes on how you're perceived and received in groups. And if those groups are arm open, then you have a sense of belonging, a sense of community. But if it is resistance, if you're the subject of ridicule, or if you have certain kinds of ribbing and it reaches a tipping point, well, then folks make other kind of decisions. So today I just kind of want to hear from you, but also especially from parents of biracial kids. Interracial marriages are increasing. That would suggest to me that there are plenty of white moms out there with biracial black kids, or other heritage configurations, or black dads with biracial kids and other kind of configurations. And, as a person that raised biracial presenting children, their mother is black and I'm biracial by birth, but I identify black culturally, which was my pathway as a kid born in 1968. But I know it can be unique, because your children are living in a duality that the monolithic monoracial parent does not necessarily share. And so I'd like to talk to biracial folks, and I'd also like to talk to parents of biracial children. So let's do this format. If you are here, thank you so much for being here. If you could hit that like button in the YouTube space, I would greatly appreciate that. And if you could offer any kind of questions that you might have to kind of get us started, you're more than welcome to do that. The page's development, we've been growing and having a great time with it. We did a subscribers only show here recently, had great feedback. The consensus was that we ought to keep it parent. It ought to have an emphasis on biracial because that seems to be the interest from the current, what I'll call budding community. I haven't quite got my arms around who the community is just yet. Definitely have some regular folks, Mulatto Vanguard, shout out to you, brother. Telling Stewart, Jury Nullification, good to see you. Thank you for coming in. So we have some ambassadors that are, regular, in the show, but I'm still getting my hands around the community. And so I didn't want to talk at you this evening. I want to sort of talk with you. And so I'm beginning to see some comments. Good evening, J4 Conversation. Good evening, everyone. Beautiful, beautiful. Center Point Media. I don't know if we've met each other. I have 2 dual heritage daughters, German and Black American. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, Center Point, are you looking at your picture there? You seem to be the dad, a brother, rocking the brim, I see. Did you meet your the mother of the children? Not sure if that's your wife. Did y'all meet in some kind of military capacity? Just out of curiosity. I say that because my experience with biracial kids were largely men who were in the military, who had then traveled in various, not just wartime scenarios, but as a function of their enlistment. As you all know, military folks travel every 3 or 4 years. My dad was assigned to Italy when I was alive. His first assignment was to France, where he met my mother. My mother's a European French woman born in Rouen, and then grew up in a little town called Evreux. And they met while Americans were allowed to be have a military base in France. The President Gaulle kicked America out in 1964, and before that, they got married and came back to the United States in 1966 and had set up shop. They had to pick a particular location to live because of it was illegal for interracial marriages in 17 states, and so the Air Force had to assign them to one of the other 17 states that had where misogynistic marriage was permissible, and so they chose Illinois, and then that's ultimately where I was born. On another show, I like to jokingly say I was conceived as a criminal act, meaning it was illegal for interracial marriages in 17 states, as I mentioned, and that's probably when I was conceived, 1967. It was the Loving case of 1967 that dismantled misogynistic laws and therefore permitting interracial marriages in any state. But I jokingly say I was committed in a criminal act. I was born in January of 68, so I was certainly conceived in 67. All right. There's a debate about the use if biracial dual heritage mix. What are your thoughts? Okay. We'll kind of start there. Center Point Media. And for those of y'all joining in, I'm also on a campaign to grow. We have over 4,000 watch hours, which is the number to meet a monetization destiny, but you need 1,000 subscribers. And we've been stuck at 626 for quite some time. And so any assistance in that area is greatly, greatly appreciated. All right, Center Point. There is a debate about the use of biracial, dual heritage, mixed, etc. What are your thoughts? All right, folks in the chat, please give your thoughts. I'll give my answer. So biracial would literally say that you have an interracial marriage of two monoracial people. So it is a literal translation of the identity or racial identity of the child being the product of two monoracial people. Biracial is a term that I've used almost my entirety of my life. When I introduce my identity, I say I'm biracially black and white. Mom is a European French woman. Dad is a black Creole cat out of New Orleans and by way of Gary, Indiana. And so I acknowledge biracial in terms of the racial classification, but as I've mentioned perhaps too many times, I identify black. I've not heard dual heritage used too much. That almost sounds to me like an academic term, dual heritage. That is literally a synonym to biracial, but I've also heard mixed. So I'm very comfortable and certainly have clarity and would use it in sort of cavalier conversations, biracial and or mixed. I like the biracial designation and problematically because it reflects my particular heritage. Biracial because of history and because of the obsessive national conversation for centuries around black-white dynamics, biracial tends to suggest a black parent and a white parent. Although, a Latino parent and a Native parent would certainly, their child would be biracial, but it has this sort of assumptive association with black and white. Mixed would suggest any heritage. So if you use mixed in a conversation, you would then have to clarify, you'd have to further ask. But in the very niche dynamic of the percentages of interracial marriages, 18% of them are black-white, all right, and typically white mother, black father. And so in my niche, in my sphere, in my circle, biracial is just simply understood to be black and white. If someone were to say mixed, I would think that maybe they're of a different kind of heritage configuration and they're making that classification. So I'm not quite sure if it's a debate. Mulatto Vanguard is advocating for mulatto. He has some conversations about that on his channel. But biracial kind of would be the default term that I would go to. What names would you all recommend? All right. I am the dad and my wife is German from Munich. Okay. And no, I was not in the military, just as well traveled black man. Beautiful, beautiful. There's something about one shaping one's worldview when you travel. I cannot highly recommend more the beautiful, beautiful people that you travel. It does a number of things. I lived in Italy from 9 to 12 years old. I lived in an Italian town. We were a train ride away from Paris, where we would sort of dock in and then, catch the car and go to Evreux to see my maternal parents, grandparents, cousins on the French side. And to travel at a young age and to just have that influence and to be immersed. I lived in an Italian town. I went to school on the Air Force base, but everything else besides sports and school was right there in the Italian community. And I was embraced. The Italians had an obsession with my hair. And yes, I did have hair at one point, but the curly hair, the afro was like, I don't know if they thought it was good luck or something like that, but they were always touching my hair, without requesting. I don't know what the heck wrong with these people, but I saw it as a cultural interest. I've always seen people reacting to my biracialness as a curiosity, and rather than be resentful and, kind of standoffish, I just kind of went with the flow. I was a shy, kind of introverted kid, but yeah, it's always been interesting how people, particularly of another country, let alone here in the US at the time, have this curiosity about biracial kids. But when you travel, it does a number of things. It lets you know the vastness and the complexity and the beauty of the 7.7 billion people that make up the human family. And it also teaches you something about humanness, because if you grow up in very localized, small exposure neighborhoods, cities, states, then your worldview is largely circulated around zip codes, right? But when you travel, you quickly realize that you're not the center of the world. You quickly realize that other cultures exist. They have belief systems. They have an origin story. They have customs. They have culture. They have certain kinds of ways of expression, of relationship, of deference to elders, and those kind of things. So traveling gives you example of how other people live in the world. And as someone that is sort of sitting at the feet of the world, you then get to, very much like biracial kids, you get to sort of pick and choose those things that you admire, those things that you value, and those things that you sort of want to acculturate into your own life. And so traveling not only teaches you you're not the center of the world, but it also teaches you the beauty in other people. And there's some, what I'll call healthy humbleness in that, is to realize that that there's humanity. Then you break it down by continent, then you break it down by country, then you break it down by state, at least in the case of America, city, neighborhoods, and the like. But if you can see yourself at the highest level of immersion and engagement with the broad totality of the human family, then you can easily see yourself localized in your neighborhood and internal communities. But it stretches your mind, and it also lets you know that there's many ways to be in the world. There's many identities for folks to have in the world. And in some instances, it's freeing, it's liberating to know that you're a part of something bigger than yourself, while at the same time not losing yourself. All right. Brandon Goldsmith, Air Force brat, beautiful. Are you biracial, Brandon? Thank you guys for coming in. Really appreciate you all participating here. I'm a black, white, identify as biracial mix. Okay, so you and I are kind of on the same page. Not quite sure the generation that you were born in, but or the year that you were born in. But yeah, that's terminology that is certainly consistent with us. Okay. I was doing research and lecturing, working on my book, The Browning of Europe, which was published in 2003. Okay. Y'all check that out. I don't know if it's through Amazon or self-published or whatever the case may be. The book is called The Browning of Europe. Yeah. If you'd like to come up and maybe do a promo for your book, I'm interested in The Browning of Europe. I'm assuming you're talking about immigration patterns or perhaps expatriates. When I lived in Italy and was observing France, I don't recall too many expatriates being there. Expatriates being Americans who move overseas permanently, or at least that's their goal. I imagine there's some denial of citizenship. I would need to be better educated on that. But the browning of the world in a lot of time comes from immigration. And a lot of the immigrant patterns also coming from the continent, coming from Africa and Europe, especially France. They had some tension and turmoil, as you do whenever a new community of people come in significant masses. It sort of shakes up the equilibrium, and more importantly, the sort of cultural norm or cultural sensibility or cultural desire of a people who, have issues with so-called new people coming to the environment and sort of shaking up their reality or shaking up kind of what they found to be comfortable. And oftentimes there's blame and accusation that kind of goes towards the recent immigrant. All right, so would love to let me know, Center Point, if you're interested in coming up a little bit and talking about the book. I'd certainly welcome you up. In fact, let me just go on and be a generous, gracious host. My apologies. Appreciate y'all coming in. Today we're just kind of musing. Normally, if you look at the page, there's intentional monologue that occurs around various parenting or biracial themes. And there's some good discussion that comes out of that. But today I just wanted to open it up, y'all, just sort of chop with you, just to have a different approach, to get to know you all a little bit better. All right, I put the chat in the stream. Centerpoint Media is up in this piece. When we moved to the States, we tried connecting to other interracial couples and families, parents groups raising biracial kids. Were you successful in that? You know, in my experience, you had, GIs, typically enlisted men, not officers. I imagine there were some officers who had mixed, women of other countries or white women. But we were the sons and daughters of Black military enlisted men, and then wherever the international assignment was, the overseas assignment, should a love relationship kindle there and resulting in marriage and producing beautiful babies, that was our circle. And so we all had a commonality of a Black pop, but then there was the configuration of German mothers, French mothers, perhaps to a lesser extent French mothers, and then certainly Asian mothers, particularly Korean mothers. So wherever the military went, whether it was from a war perspective or a friendly arrangement, or just as you have military bases throughout the world, wherever military GIs were, assuming there was a friendliness to them where they could get the weekend pass and go out into the community, a small percentage of them came back with wives, right? They went to overseas and came back with wives. My dad was he was a dancer, and so they called him Boga, which means pretty man, pretty boy, or handsome man. Bo meaning pretty and Ga meaning man. So Boga is what they called him, and he was a dancer. So he would go into Paris and hit the scene, hit the nightclub. Black GIs kind of going into space, and they would dance. And my mother was a dancer as well. And so she saw him and they hit it off, on the dance floor, and decided to kind of take it from there. I imagine it's a unique personality, in the maternal figure, to not only, my mother was a Catholic woman. Her father was a Muslim Muslim man from Algeria, but the family largely was raised Catholic. She has had a high national love and loyalty to French. In fact, she refused to give up her accent. She was French 100. But it takes a lot of courage not only to marry someone of a different race in the early 60s, but also to then know that would entail going to an entirely different country. And I don't know what the perception of the U.S. at the time was, but this was the 60s. A lot were going on. But that takes a very unique personality. And I imagine mothers from my generation were very feisty, fiery, independent women. I certainly know that my mother was, and that kind of played itself out in unique ways, good and or problematic, when she was navigating nationality, culture, this new race, because Blackness didn't mean the same in France, where you have GIs representing Blackness and musicians. That certainly wasn't the same kind of reality that she would experience coming back to the Midwest, Illinois, and spending time in Gary, Indiana. And so, she was a fiery, feisty woman that perhaps had to take on a lot of cutting eyes, a lot of, passive racism, direct racism. I remember times that I wasn't even permitted, and I don't quite know how I feel about this, but I wasn't permitted to go to her job, because if they found out she was associated with someone, that she was an end lover, as they called it back in the day, that she would be vulnerable to losing her job. And so, it's just the silliness of race of old. All right, we got Rashad CPM in the house. Rashad, what's good, brother? How you feeling, man? I can't hear you. Let me unmute you. Oh, I gotta mute the music. Hold on. Let me mute the music.
Dang.
I'm gonna get you in here, brother.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. I got you. How
Okay.
you doing, man? Nice to meet you.
Great, brother. Appreciate you bringing me on, man. No doubt.
Yeah, yeah. Are you a first time watcher or
No, I caught one of your shows earlier on in the summer and everything. I really enjoyed it, and so I was just browsing through the YouTube, and you guys came up, and so I'm just, yeah, just tuning in and enjoy the topic and conversation. It's good stuff, man.
yeah, man, I'm just kind of musing. Usually I got my notes and some subject matter I want to share, but hey, it's Tuesday. My father and his lady is coming in town. I'm gonna meet her for the first time. She's from Baton Rouge.
Okay.
And so I look forward to meeting her first of all. And my dad's 78 and his wife passed away about
Yeah.
3 years ago, and so it's nice to see him still active. And so yeah, I'll be offline for a couple of days, I imagine. So I wanted to get it in, but didn't really have any content. I said, well, hey, let me go talk to the beautiful people.
No
So
doubt.
Rashad, I appreciate you catching the show. So you say you have children of a German and black mix?
Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah. Two daughters.
2 daughters. Okay, yeah, yeah. I have 4 boys and two daughters. All right, they're kind
Okay.
of bookends, but
Yeah.
man, I've always certainly been more comfortable raising them boys. Them girls, boy,
Yeah.
I struggle with. So hats off to you, brother. I'm sure they're beautiful. What
Yes.
are they in their late teens, 20s?
Yeah, they're college age, so they one is third year, another one's second year. She's going to her second year. So
Okay,
yeah, so they're studying. We have one actually, my younger one, and she just came back from Morocco with her mom. They were over there for a few weeks and stuff. So traveling, and going to Germany, and then they went to Morocco and stuff. And so
man, that's
yeah,
powerful. That's
yeah.
powerful. So,
So
so
yeah,
they're a world.
travel, man. We try to get them out. We went. I took them up to Oregon for the World Championship track and field events
Okay,
this summer.
Eugene.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Yeah, so we went up there. I'm in Sacramento, by the way. I didn't know if you knew that.
Okay,
So
the
I'm in
Bay.
Sacramento
All right.
now. Yeah, and so yeah, we we trying to do the right things. They doing their thing. Empowering and so yeah, we keep them traveling, understand the world, like you were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
so critical. So
Yeah,
definitely.
no doubt, brother. I mean, if economics always plays a part in that, but we prioritize a number of different things, and magically we get what we prioritize.
Hmm.
If you can get your babies off American soil just to experience it, man, your child will be better for it. The memories you all create together will be better for the family, and these are experiences that the seeds, the children will last a lifetime, and they will likely transfer some form of that to their own seed. So you can, in your generation, you can shape future generations by what you expose your children to. Rashad, I'd love to hear more about the book, but let me ask you, how do your children identify? Do they identify biracial or black or what?
They identify as German black, pretty much.
Okay.
It's kind of weird too, because that's I'm glad you brought this topic up, because more so my older one, she's much more conscious about that than my younger one. My younger one is just kind of like herself, so she's just more.
Mm-hmm.
She's just me, or she's just Alia. She just
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but the
Don't
older
even
one,
get into it.
yeah, the other one, she's much more conscious. She takes after me a lot in that sense of history, and world politics and things of that nature. So she's a bit more chip off the block with me with that. But the other one,
Okay.
yeah, she just kind of like just universal, just herself.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think they have an equal interest in both German history and Black history, or it varies between
uh,
the two?
yeah, I would say probably the younger ones more with the, well, they both we try to make sure they get both of that, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and everything. But I would say the older one's more on the Black history side than the younger one. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of if I'm kind of weighing it out, yeah, the older one probably a little bit more conscious to a lot of that.
Do do they speak the language?
Yeah, yeah, they do, yeah. Mhm.
Man,
Yeah.
that's powerful.
Yeah,
You know.
I took them like from what we were here. They raised in Germany for a little while. Then we moved back to the States, and then so once we got them immersed, and we kept them up. Their mom, obviously German, so we kind of cultivate that, and then we put them in German programs. They have a German center here in our town and stuff, and so, then they had to take German in high school too. So no choice.
Yeah, get that A. Yeah. Parents of interracial parents of biracial kids, if they're and all, all come the one benefit of, well, let me say it this way: if you look at the immigration pattern, the African experience at large involuntarily came to America. So there's a break back to a particular country on the continent where one can pull detailed kind of cultural nuances, although Me 23 or whatever that is sort of revealing that in unique kind of ways. But if you look at most white folks, they can trace an immigration pattern from a country of home. And depending on how many generations removed they are from that, if they can visit that or have connections to family and grandparents, or again, depends on how many generations removed, and if they can connect their beautiful seeds to that, to include some immersion in the language, not only does it do well for their intellectual synapses connection, but also again it's that stretch. It gives them a worldview, and then they have a language beyond American, which allows them to navigate spaces in different ways. When I was coming up, I knew enough Italian and French to be on my own. But when I came back to the United States, I rejected it, Rashad. It was one of the worst decisions I made, man. I rejected the language piece, and then I didn't have readily at my hands access to sort of French biography or French history. And so I just kind of pathwayed into what was available in my immediate circle, which was sort of Black themes and subject matter. And so, yeah, it's beautiful that your seeds have the balance. Wonderful. Rashad, before we you tell us about the book, did you have any questions or anything on a Black and biracial and mixed musing Tuesday?
Nah, nothing. Pops, just nah. I'll come up with something in a second.
All good, brother. So the book is The Browning of Europe, published in 2003. All right. Yeah. So what was the motivation to sit down and go through a very arduous task of writing a book? I have a self-published book, and man, hats off to you. So tell us a little about the context for the creation of the book and a little bit about the book itself.
Certainly, I appreciate that. Well, the book initially just came about from my years living in Germany and just kind of my experience. So it was initially sort of like my own little memoir and experience, being a Black man and from America in Germany, in Europe and stuff. And so I just kind of like was looking at different things and what was happening at the time, and really just sort of pinpointing on the fact that Europe is going through this change. It's the arrival of this new Europe. This arrival of Europe now has to see itself as a multicultural continent. Western Europe primarily, and so the emphasis was to really outline the fact that Europe was struggling with its own identity crisis, and how because the white population in Europe is declining, and it's been declining for decades now, and so who are going to be the replacement people? Well, it's these folks who've been immigrating and folks who've been for generational years, and many of those people are considered to be non-white, and so that's the point of the book, the Browning of Europe.
Where were the immigration patterns from? Where were they coming from?
Certainly. Well, there's continent. There's Asia. You have a large number of Asians coming in, and Central Asians. And then what a lot of people aren't aware of is actually Russians are really more Asiatic than they are, because the largest part of Russia people are on the Asiatic side of that continent than they are in the Western European side, and so forth. And but there's that history, because obviously from the war, and the Russians, and there's a lot of conflict dealing with that.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have some Eastern Europeans, particularly at the time, from from the wall being broke down and stuff. Because
Right.
I go back to like 98 to about 04 and stuff like that. So I was in that time period. So we went from like when the euro came into Germany and all that experience and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
seeing that whole transformation of I've been in the Eastern Germany, Western, and all that. And so, and then African, there's a lot of African, certainly there, and even Caribbean, surprisingly, Caribbean and South American. And of course, what we say Middle Easterner people,
Mm-hmm.
Arabs and so forth.
Muslims, yeah.
So it's a collage, a lot of different folks moving there. And then, of course, I'm just being around and being there, is always surprising. You hear an American, somebody talking, and you're like, you're
yeah.
I'm from California. They can be from like New Jersey or whatever. And it's just like, oh,
like, yeah. No,
you're American, you cool, So,
passport life. Folks are getting out.
Yeah.
Now, Rashad, let me ask you I think anytime a new significant mass of people come to a place, you can even look at America's when you had immigrants arrive, they typically are isolated. They're put into certain sections of the city. They typically suffer a certain kind of hostility. They take the lowest kind of paying jobs. And they're criminalized in many instances. We see that in the Italian, Irish, Jewish community. But then over generations, they make adjustments in terms of outward expression of culture, and they kind of blend in a bit more, and then they kind of improve their circumstances. Blackness didn't necessarily have that because you can never change melanin, and so the generational shift is going, but it's slower for racialized reasons. But anytime you come in, your identity is almost hyper analyzed, and there's really not too much intermixing. And so I don't know how long the browning of Europe is occurring, but are they still in enclaves and in pockets of segregation and only operating socially for work and commerce? Or are you starting to see interracial marrying or dating among recent immigrant populations?
Yeah, and I'm glad you really highlight that, because, again, that's one of the things that even in my book, I would have had thought there would be much more progression. And as you said, that's one of the issues, that critical issues in Europe, particularly because of those constraints. It's very hard for immigrants to move up that ladder, that social ladder like that. A lot of them get locked in, certainly, particularly the lower education, the impoverished refugee class is very, very difficult for those folks to move in. Generally, the people who have the greater access, as you might find, universally, are the ones who come in as academics, a lot of students, exchange students, and so forth like that. That's where you see a lot of greater upper mobility. And then, of course, there is that sort of colorism thing where, as it's related to biracial mixed people as well, too, they get certain benefits like that, sort of in the same way. Definitely.
Do they similarly identify as biracial in Europe, or do they consider themselves a member of the cultural monoracial group?
A bit of both. I would say there's a leaning to certainly the reclamation of their heritage, because a lot of them have been marginalized for so many years and stigmatized, with that, and so forth. And so there is this reclamation of this identity relative to their biracial identity. They're certainly, if it's Black, then you'll see a lot of that. Generally speaking, if they're mixed with some other ethnic origin, then they might be less because they want to assimilate more, getting that racial pass or sort of thing. And particularly if they're coming from certain countries or something, they don't want to get stereotyped and so forth. So they kind of hide that. like we see here in America. You know, when you see
Right.
certain immigrants come and they change their identities and names and
Yeah,
things,
yeah, yeah.
you know, and stuff.
Yeah, it's identity formation is so constructed, but it's also
Mhm.
fascinating. But I
Mhm.
think human beings will always seek paths towards
Right.
reduced oppression and maximizing opportunity, right? And
Hmm.
we do that in a host of ways, but generationally,
Right.
some families will do that by birth
Hmm.
circumstances.
Right.
It's interesting, but it also reflects the dynamic that, and I don't know if this is true or from your views, but the darker hue part of any country typically has some of the most
Hmm.
challenging
Right.
dynamics, which is sort of a country colorism,
Sure.
placed upon largely upon the foot of darker, beautiful brothers and sisters. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to something earlier you asked me about with my daughters and stuff too, that
Yeah.
just kind of came to my mind. And, in this sense, because, when you're saying about how to identify and so forth. And I think this sort of plays into, my daughters as well too, just based on kind of like how their experiences have been. So what I'm saying is that with my older daughter, she has light eyes, so she's like hazel green eyes and stuff,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
she has very curly hair. So her hair is very curly. Um, and so you can kind of really tell she's mixed, but you don't know exactly what she's mixed with
Right.
necessarily. While my other daughter is more fair and has straighter hair.
Uh-huh.
So you can't tell what she is. Like when she was over Morocco, they didn't know whether she was Arab
Yeah.
or this and
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
she has a much more ambiguous look,
Okay.
to her, because obviously you can looks more European, lighter, fairer. All the time when I used to take her to games, they were looking at me like
Hmm. Yeah. What's going on here?
white girl.
Hmm.
Like, they don't look at
Hmm.
me. I said that one right there, and
Hmm.
stuff. I've been getting that all my life. So they've been like,
Yeah.
you know, so I think subtly that kind of plays into her in the way she has been treated by others in that sense, even though she's cognizant and conscious of her blackness. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So she doesn't let that, but she's just aware. But yeah. But going back to this other point, yeah, it you do see that somewhat with indigenous, folks who are been raised in Europe and under that culture and they might not as less attach their other heritage from
Hmm.
other country to that. They just identified themselves as whatever European. Now, I did collaborate with a lot of what we call Afro Europeans, Black Europeans, and so forth.
Okay.
Meeting them from all over the place. From like
Hmm. Hmm.
Poland and Switzerland,
Wow.
all over, man. It's like all over, and and just learning about their experiences and different things, which I added into my book because that was one of the things I really want to know. How were their experiences growing up? What were some of their struggles? What are some of the things that they go through? And
Hmm.
certainly, again, like I said earlier, there's an advantage um, as there are in many places when you're sort of mixed versus if you are not. If you're more
So,
monoracial. Yeah.
so as a black pops, married to a German woman, raising two biracial children with not the exact same look, you would underscore that a biracialness has a certain privilege to it. Am I paraphrasing you correctly on that, Rashad?
Yeah. That
I
was
say
it.
I say that because
Yeah.
in the
Colorism,
biracial, yeah, in the biracial community that I've recently discovered, we did a video. It went viral. We were talking about our story,
yeah,
my partner and I, on
yeah,
this platform, about how we pathwayed into black and all the beauty and
right.
issues with that.
Mhm.
And out of nowhere, man, this commentary that biracial kids aren't black, started to pop up, and it was amazing. I was like, what? That
Yeah.
this didn't square with my coming of age process. And then in a little bit of research, I discovered a community of folks who, for whatever reasons, I think in part twofold. One is they had a tipping point of enough rejection in terms of gatekeeping to get into blackness that they said forget it. I'm going to go do something else by way of identity. But then also, the further and further you get away from legal racism, that culminates in the mid 60s, the generation, the further you get away from that, the more you're born into a circumstance where you recognize and admire and honor two love sources, right? To where in my day, and perhaps your children are a little, about somewhere in my age set, but you and I might be similar in age. We, in our biracial journey, we tended to quiet or suppress the maternal voice, the white mother voice, because we were just looking to maximize black cues or black triggers to the broader society. And so we kind of silenced our black mothers, perhaps in a cowardly kind of way, and maximized our blackness. But today's generation is like, no, we're gonna recognize both our love sources, and they move and identify accordingly, or at least in a more emerging kind of way.
Definitely. And let me just share this with you too. The sort of added caveat for me, with making sure my kids understood their German identity and culture is because, see, their mom is the only one here. She's the only one in her family, so she's it. And so, she's got so much love for my family, to death. And I just reinforced that with my daughters to understand that their mom doesn't have any family here, that they're her family. And so, honor her by, carrying on her history, carrying on that part of her lineage within you, because it's not easy for her. She lost her mom. She really kind of grew up without a dad because they divorced when she was young and so forth and everything. So I just kind of emphasize that, make sure that they understand that connection is important, and embrace that. Like I said, don't be ashamed of any of you part of who you are, because you wouldn't be who you are without those ingredients. So
absolutely,
understand it. They're equally part of you. And definitely.
I got much respect for today's generation of young people, to include all cultural community youth, but certainly biracial, because they're showing a certain courage. The 2000 census and the way that two or more races was positioned came from biracial folks advocating for a more accurate or precise assessment of identity. But I also think it was, not a rejecting of a monoracial membership, but more of an exalting of family structure in recognizing the dualness of their heritage. So much respect for their courage and heritage. Y'all, we're talking to Rashad, goes by Centerpoint Media. He is the author of The Browning of Europe. If someone wanted to get the book, Rashad, how would they do that?
All the outlets out there. Amazon is probably the easiest and quickest one to get out there. It was self-published through Ex Libris books publishing, and so. But yeah, I would check through Amazon. You can get it there. Good source.
All right. Are you do you got anything you want to shout out besides the book? Are you a YouTuber or anything like that?
Not too much. I just enjoy, the Vine that everybody is putting out, a lot of good energy out there. I'm going to be eventually dabble into that later. I'm a professor actually, right? So I got enough work talking a lot. So I teach at Sacramento State University.
Okay, Prof. I feel
so my
you.
emphasis is in race and culture and all this. Yeah. So this is my wheelhouse.
Well, beautiful. Yo, we are talking to, is a doctor?
No. Just
is Professor Centerpoint Media in the house, race relations. Well, now that I know that, and I didn't ask up front because I don't want to put people's business out there, but I work in collegiate spaces, primarily on the athletic side of the house, and do development work with athletes with a particular concentration on football and track, which means black men and women. But let me ask you, if you don't mind answering, a part of my enjoyment here is I'm watching a sociological anthropological experiment where you have a new emerging community of young people who are attempting to assert a new identity in the modern era. I'm speaking of biracial and mixed kids who are sort of rejecting older generations' notion about
Mhm.
if you have some culture in you, then you represent that particular monoracial group. And so the
Right.
biracial community is asserting and asking for its own identity, and they're doing it in different kind of ways. They're not
Mhm.
quite
Mhm.
harmonious and unified in that just
Right.
yet. But
Mhm.
what are your thoughts initially on that? And is the question even viable from your sense?
Yeah, I get that, and I see that even in our census demographics, we have a multicultural or multi-ethnic uh, category as well too,
Mm-hmm.
and in my classes, we talk about, we deal with that certainly, and I definitely see that in how you have two different, like you can have two different like pairings, like hey, black and white, and they,
Mm-hmm.
they, even though the ethnic or nationalities might be different in terms of especially about the white part, one can be German or one can be Bulgarian or whatever.
Right.
Um, is we still kind of say white black, and they would identify differently. So it's like
Mm-hmm. I get it
so
right.
yeah, so it's so that yeah, it's just this generation is different.
Mm-hmm.
They're into their self, and this just, so I mean, identity is just changing by the day. I talk about this all the time, and they don't look at it like we grew up in our generations looking at it. And whether we like it or not, that's just kind of like who they are. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
kind of hard to like kind of like, okay, this until they get hit over the head and something's going to happen, and then they'd be like, because they wasn't prepared.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, oftentimes they're not prepared for those experiences that are going to come, because someone's going to say something, someone's going to treat them a certain way, and this and that, and so then it kind of brings that reality check, and this has all been a part of this whole uh, the whole passing phenomenon, the whole ideal of just trying to get into this accepted white world and all that kind of thing like that, because that is sort of the draw to why we see so many people, again, from the perspective of whiteness identity,
Mm-hmm.
do that, and
Yeah.
I emphasize that with a lot of groups that have some ancestral black heritage in them, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but they're on the passing game, like I say, they the mascots for white folks, because
Okay. Okay.
they play in the role. They want to be of color when it's comfortable and convenient over here, but then they get the favors of the whiteness because they got a fairer skin, or they got a straighter head and all that other stuff like that.
Yeah.
And things that accentuate a comfortability for white folks. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and too much blackness is it doesn't work too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. No, it's dynamic. There's some in the community, I think, that are as you articulate. There's also, I'm noticing, folks who have come out of a pro-black space and discovered, some of the beauty and complexity and
Mhm.
rigidity and ridiculousness that's in all communities,
Right.
and we're sort of disillusioned by that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they can articulate white
Mhm.
supremacy and
Right.
institutional racism with the best of
Sure.
them, but they're seeking something new. And in
Right.
all my identity conversations, I've never seen the momentum and energy for this new ground. Right now, I don't quite know.
Mhm.
Sometimes the rhetoric can sound a little bit
Yeah.
problematic, but as an aggregate, some are chasing whiteness,
Mhm.
as we've seen in previous generations, but some of them are chasing something new, and that's what's
Yeah.
fascinating to me. Because if anyone's interested, and by the way, thank you
Mhm.
guys for coming in. If you wouldn't mind, please that helps us. And then of course, if you find value in the conversation, we'd appreciate your subscribe and telling some folks about us. But a lot of them are, they're seeking something new. We did a previous show on J4 Conversations called The
Mhm.
9 Criteria, and it was
Mhm.
amusing around what would it take for the question to even make sense. But what really strikes me is the question having legitimacy is
Mhm.
the pure raw numbers of young human beings who are two or more races. When I
Mm.
was born, in 1970, only about 1% of people identified as two or more races. Today,
Right.
it's
Hmm.
10%.
Yeah.
10% or 33.8 million. And
Hmm.
when you were a small percentage, you just see you had three ways to track. You could
Hmm.
isolate, you could
Hmm.
track white, or you could persistently try to track black. But
Right.
nowadays they have many more options, and they have new platforms by which to form community. And so it's fascinating to me. I feel like we're on the dawn of literally a sociological, anthropological experiment. I don't know if it'll succeed, but I
Hmm.
do think the question has more legitimacy than certainly in my generation, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
Rashad.
Yeah, definitely. And like I say, we're seeing a certain increase in the number of biracial mixed kids. I thought when you were initially stating that, I thought you was going to go in the direction of like this seemingly surgence of biracial athletes, because we certainly have seen a lot of up and coming athletes, professional athletes, college athletes of biracial heritage and so forth, and so a lot of celebration on that. You know, to be.
Yeah. I try to stay away from cultural, I mean, a racial celebration, although I understand the pride that inherently goes with communal cultural membership.
Hmm.
But, but I think you're going to see more and more biracial mixed race kids in all sectors of society because
Hmm.
more and more interracial marriages are occurring,
Right.
and you're going to see them in traditionally black spaces because oftentimes the marital pattern is black man and
Hmm.
at least in the case of biracial, white
Hmm.
woman.
Right.
Prior to what I call the modern era of biracialness, which is
Hmm.
the
Right.
60s, to me is the turning point to that. But prior to
Right.
the 60s, most biracial children were the products of white fathers.
Right.
But after the 60s, it flipped, and most of the product are black fathers and white women.
Hmm.
And so these black fathers had a worldview and experience that they then transition and transfer
Hmm.
to their sons and daughters. And so
Hmm.
now you see biracial kids showing up in spaces where it was historically perhaps black or dominated by black folk. If does that make sense from you? Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, and just kind of piggyback into that is, we're certainly seeing a big culture shift about the relationships dynamics. And I this is another area where I'm in deep with this as well, and what's going on, what's the occurrence. Now, the city I'm in, I see a lot of black women who are in interracial relationships.
Black
Uh,
women.
Black women, yeah, a
Okay.
lot of them,
Oh,
yeah.
in the Bay. Yeah, the Bay. That's the Black
They
Power
yeah, they a
corner.
lot of them, and equal to what you see with black men. And
Hmm.
so and even on campus there's a lot of that. So like I said, it's just generation, they've kind of grown up in a different time where they much more closely linked in a lot of ways. So they even though you have still the racial issues, but at the same time there's just a much more openness about interracial relationships today, on a lot of different levels, that we're seeing. So it is definitely is going to continue to increase because these kids are going to school together, they're hanging out,
Hmm.
same music,
Hmm.
same culture, and
Hmm.
so forth. Um, and as you would point out earlier, for me, I just want to encourage more of our young, just black people in general, just to, like I say, be much more worldly, much more well traveled. Understand, like I said, that we're global people. You can find
Hmm.
us
Hmm.
everywhere on the planet,
Hmm.
and so that we're not limited just to the continent of Africa or America or any place. We have been everywhere. We're indigenous in a lot of places,
Hmm.
and so that's one of the resonating things, that again that was well documented by all these explorers like Marco Polo and her
Yeah.
folks back in the day.
Yeah,
Henry the
you know, the,
Navigator and all these other ones out
yeah,
there.
they claim they can't. They
It was-
claim they discovered a country, but they discovered a
yeah,
country with some people on it,
yeah,
right? And the
exactly.
people had a
Yeah,
lot of melanin in them.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So, so y'all can anticipate Rashad's next book, The Browning of America, right?
There
So
you go.
we're talking with Rashad. He has written a book, came out in 2003. It's available in most platforms, called The Browning of Europe. That shouldn't be surprising because, you know, as the U.S. goes, other countries certainly have longer
Right.
history but similar immigration patterns.
Right.
You know, you talk about the change in today's generation, and I like to say that, you know, America is today sometimes because of the work of ancestors and elders, or in spite of. But you know, the 60s in particular was one of the last vestiges of a racialized law, the 14th Amendment being enforced, and civil rights legislation. And the further and further you get away from that, the protest and activism is not upon rigid racial lines that a person of color was subjected to. It becomes more incidents. It still has lingering manifestations, but if you think a generation in terms of 25 years, we're two generations removed from a highly rigid, racialized, segregated U.S. And particularly in the North and the South, increasingly so, people are moving and they're mobile and they're interacting and they're mixing and they're doing different things.
Right.
And today, if a person's 25, they were born in, you know, late 90s, and naturally they don't see race with the same rigid lens by which their parents or grandparents did, and they're playing that out in social kind of spaces. So back to the 9 criteria, I think this reality, this new reality, will continue to bring historically rigid racialized groups together in more frequent, fluid, you know, fluid kind of ways, and relationship will come out of that. So the interracial marriage trajectory, I think, is just going to increase, and out of that are going to become more and more biracial folks. Rashad, I really appreciate you chopping with me, man. Is there anything else you want to kind of process before I deal with this last question I'm seeing here presented by Brandon?
Nah, just you right on point. You know, just real quick, yeah, because I'm also like you. I'm into athletics. You know, formerly played at sports and all that. Come from a sports family and what have you.
Okay.
And I do, but I coach softball and I do training. So I actually had a girl who I'm working with, do some strength and conditioning, speed training and so forth. And she was a young lady in high school who's also biracial, and she's very white passing too. So I'm gonna ask her next time. How does she identify? I know her parents her dad's black, her mom's white, and stuff. And she's a very talented young lady. And I'm you know, just kind of like I'm gonna have to bring that up next time I see her next week. How does she identify? Because she's again has a very just lovely personality, and you know, and just it's interesting. Not like you think, oh, she's this way. She's very cognizant because she wears 42 as her number. Her last name is actually Robinson. So
Jackie Robinson, yeah.
She's definitely conscious of that. And you know what's really interesting too, like I was saying, my affiliation with youth softball, I've seen this on more than one occasion where I've seen the black dads have their daughters wear 42 for Jackie Robinson. Yeah, the black dads emphasize it. But when I see the moms, like if it's a black mom or white mom or something, they don't have it. If it's a mixed daughter, I'm saying, you know, our daughter and daughter in general, whether it be black daughter or not. I like seeing that, and every time I'll be doing a shout out to the guys that had a daughter. It was like a few girls I've seen have 42 on there, honor Jackie Robinson. So it's kind of cool to see that. Go through and
representing Jackie Robinson, first to integrate American baseball. Wasn't necessarily the best Negro League baseball player, but certainly fit the profile to make that transition. Exactly. I think telling Stewart jury nullification has a question for you, Rashad. So is Europe becoming mixed race because biracial people are an independent racial demographic? So is Europe becoming mixed race because biracial people are an independent racial demographic? So the question is, are biracial people, do they have their own independent designation?
No, they don't have their own independent race. Much of these countries, they don't even have a racial category. You're either of that national identity or or not, you know. So that's one of the things that I know that they have been advocating for. You know, obviously race is a very sensitive topic in a place like Germany.
Yeah.
that to kind of like, come into those categories, that's something that's been a lot of pushback, uh, so they don't want to touch that really, that issue.
So
Um,
their U.S. census doesn't break it down like that, huh? Or
no, no,
their country census, if they
yeah,
have one.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's similar in some of the other countries in the EU as well too. My children have dual heritage, so they actually have German citizenship
Oh, beautiful.
as well as American citizenship. Yeah, and it don't have no race on there. It just says German or
Mm-hmm.
thing, Deutsch.
Powerful.
So
Powerful, powerful.
yeah.
Jury notification. Thank you so much for that question. This is a parenting channel, parenting Black and biracial kids. We're chopping with Rashad, author of The Browning of Europe, the
Mm-hmm.
father of two beautiful biracial children. From the parenting perspective, and you've been in the game with the children 2 decades
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit more. What advice do you have for interracial parents raising biracial children? What comes to mind?
Well, again, you have to give your children or your child a ground foundation of who they are, because that's going to be one of the biggest things that they will encounter and struggle with. What world do they fit in? And that comes, first and foremost from the home. And then out of that, if you can, try to create a strong support system around them, certainly their friend circle, um, and so forth. Like I was saying, more so with my younger daughter, she had, some of her friends that they were other mixed race girls too. So, but then she's kind of like been between, because she played sports, she played volleyball, so all those girls were white, So,
Mm-hmm.
but like,
Are those diversifying now, boy? I tell
yeah,
you
yeah,
that.
yeah, and exactly. And then, but yeah, so you have to really, like I said, stay engaged to your child to really assure them of their identity, that there's nothing wrong with what they are, and certainly, obviously, in a society such as America, they're going to get viewed a certain way. And then you just have to, just keep it real with them about that, those factors, and be comfortable how they want to identify. Don't never feel they have to be ashamed of being Black, especially if
Yep.
they part Black,
Right.
with that part of it as well too. So yeah, um, and additionally, too, um, for parents, especially if the two parents aren't together, again, that's the other part of that as well. You just kind of have to make sure that, um, if they live with the mom, and
Mm-hmm.
happen she to be white, again, you make sure, you're giving them some food on their history,
Mm-hmm.
don't let that
Mm-hmm.
slip away as well too. So, that's sort of like the biggest things, definitely. And they gonna go through phases, understand that they're going to go through those different phases, you
Right.
know, it's just natural for that to happen, and they'll come full circle with that. There was a lot of after, with the whole, first we had the Black Lives Matter, then we had the George Floyd and all these different
Yep.
things
Yep. Yep.
that raised a lot of consciousness for a lot of these, kids, because it was always seemed as if like you had, either they was sort of raised in a more Black centric environment, or they was
Right.
raised in a more suburban white environment, and that
Right.
kind of
Right.
thing. And they kind of was detached from their Blackness. And so, even though my kids are sort of raised in the suburbs, but still, they have a consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I'm
Well,
saying? So
yeah,
they
they go.
disconnected. So they're not, you know, they don't know the hood life, but they understand Blackness.
Yeah, hey, they living in the mecca of the
Yeah,
Black Panther.
yeah, yeah, for
They in the
sure.
middle.
So they putting it down. They hear. I'm lecturing them every day. They know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's beautiful, brother.
I'll be dropping
Rashad, man.
that knowledge, man.
Hey, brother. That's beautiful, man. Thank you so much for blessing the show,
Appreciate it.
for sharing information and coming on. I truly appreciate that. Definitely feel free to come by any other time. Would love to know how
Mhm.
the conversation goes with your athlete in terms of the identity space. But
Yeah.
hey, if you know some other interracial couples or biracial
Mhm.
children who are, just trying to figure this thing out, and if we
Right.
can be a resource or a destination
Mhm.
point, man, send them our way, Rashad.
Oh, you got it, my man. I appreciate the time, brother. And you
All
keep
right,
doing your
love.
thing. Be in touch with you guys for sure. For sure. Definitely.
My email is in the about section or in one of the
Okay.
descriptions if you ever want to reach out, brother.
Okay. You got it. All right.
All
Thanks
right.
again. All right.
Love.
All right. Peace out.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rashad, for coming up. All right, y'all. We are at 105. We're going to rock and continue to rock a couple more minutes here. So if you have any other questions for me or anything you want to share, we are rolling on a Black and mixed race musing day. I didn't have anything I wanted to share. I just wanted to hear from you. Going forward, I don't want to speak necessarily at you. I do want to share content, of course, but I also want to, get to know you all a little bit and see where you're at in this journey. Understand your generational interpretation of biracial identity or mixed race identity. And sometimes, man, I just need to kind of tee it up and open it up. And for example, today we had a great guest in Rashad talking about his book, The Browning of Europe. And so if you are a person who likes to read, definitely check that out. Telling Stewart talks to us about good advice. Thank you. I'm a biracial grandmother. Hey, grandma, of an entire mixed race family. Go ahead. And I'm very in tune with our multiracial experience. All right. I did want to pull up Brandon's question. I don't know if Brandon's still here, but this would be the time to offer any last thoughts or chats as we get ready to kind of go transition. All right. Brandon is 25 years old. I will say a new issue rising among my generation is the ideal that the one drop rule no longer grants you a black card. Huh. An increasing number of black students or young people are against notion of mix equals black. Yeah. And then Brandon follows that up with, as we don't really know their struggle due to phenotypical differences. So the struggles of biracial kids, I'm imagining. All right. But the thrust of the question is that historically, the one drop rule, where if you had any presentation or proven record of blackness in the immediate parent or multi generations back, because of America's negotiating and navigating race to the favor of whiteness and to the broad categorization of all people of color into oneness that they then could be legislated upon, and didn't get into percentages of blood. It was just one drop, that those persons were categorized as black. And in some cases, you jumble communities together that had never really had any kind of connection, and there's this broad categorization of folks with melanin in the black space just kind of being a conglomerate. And as you're legislated against or legalized, or laws imposed upon you in segregation and marginalization, and laws that put you in certain places and treat you certain ways, particularly in public accommodations, out of that, and as time goes by, you just sort of cluster as a community. And because you're dealing with sort of potential threat of life and liberty and certainly freedom, you cluster because you're trying to navigate external threat. And out of that generation becomes a certain cohesiveness, a certain kind of cultural glue that bonds you, and the people are sort of connected to each other upon a cultural lines, although there's probably ample examples of colorism and infighting that have occurred. But this is culminated in the mid 60s and then moves into the modern era, where generationally things begin to change as you get further and further away from that particular moment in time of civil rights legislation, thankful to the work of the elders and ancestors. And so now you're in a modern era. The bond is changing, the glue is changing, the memory is fading, the history is being taught in different kind of ways. The biracial population is growing. And so this dynamic that you're automatically connected because of some 80, 90-year-old rule is sort of being rejected in some cases by black towards biracial, and our biracial towards black communities. And the question seems to be, having some traction. I would say problematically, I would love for the biracial and black bond to remain as it is in my mind. But again, I recognize a different era and a different time. And that's kind of where we're at. That's why I'm intentionally saying parenting black and biracial kids, because I think the biracial dynamic is unique. It shares very much the Black experience, but also with the added admix, whatever the case may be. There's something unique about sharing the heritage of two parents when you're being raised by parents who are monoracial. And so it's a great question, Brandon. If you wanted to come up and elaborate, this would be the time to do it in any kind of sense. Let me make sure I did justice to it. An increasing number of Black students are against notions of mixed Black, right? So I'm hearing Brandon say that the gatekeeping that historically been managed by monoracial Black towards biracial membership now is actually changing its tone and tenor. I'm generalizing here, of course, but is now also questioning membership itself, as to say there is no threshold of gatekeeping by which one can leap over and land in a Black monoracial relationship. I will say this, Brandon, those are likely young voices. And those are likely young voices who do not have the balance of intergenerational conversation, because that's happening in intimate social circles where you typically have one generation of a common age set. And it's also being done in technological social media spaces where there's typically not intergenerational voices. And so you have young people who are kind of going at each other in these spaces without any kind of balance or contextualizing done by an older generation. That's unavoidable. That's inevitable. And so you have young people who are dealing with life at their age and at their sort of stage of development, and they're expressing frustrations in different kind of ways, and they attack the obvious. If they're feeling some kind of way, and this is regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, if you're feeling in any kind of way of disadvantage, disrespected, sort of frowned upon, or you're just on the wrong side of the equation, then young people will attack each other based upon the obvious. And the things we attack within cultural groups is we attack each other based upon color. We attack each other based upon melanin content or the absence of it. Now, in the past, maybe that could just be squelched, or it could be managed and monitored by an intergenerational kind of interfaith. But today, young people are moving in isolation. They're moving in sort of singular level generational kind of spaces, and there's consequences. There's consequences, and one of them is sort of a, in the YouTube space, we've discovered a part of humanity that we've never seen before that had any sort of legitimacy in space, and that is to sort of have an attack mindset without consequence, a sort of vitriolic, this attacking, in the keyboard war with no accountability to it. And people have limits. You've never been able to just walk something so extremely down the road, because at some point you would get checked. You might say some crazy things, and you might do some things out of character. You might call some other people out of character, but eventually you would get checked, right? And so your journey down this road would get checked at some point. Now there's no check. And so there's the boundary to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing to the point to where historically cultural groups of the same maternal cultural bond, in some instances, are at each other's throat. At each other's throat. All right. J4 Conversations, you're building a very helpful channel. Thank you for sharing your presence and experience. Let me spin off telling Stuart jury nullification. I thank you so much for that. And that's what I want to do. I want to build a channel that does not pit biracial against Black. I want to talk to young people about intentional parenting, making a baby out of preparation and not passion, midnight passion. And I want to have some robust, healthy conversations about Blackness and about biracialness. I'm not advocating for one way or the other. I do sort of look at trends and understand different things and how they emerge. And I do see the biracial voice only getting louder because their numbers are warranting it. And that for those who are calling for a unique identity, that they make this sort of bridge or break from a loving handoff to a maternal cultural Blackness that had been their cultural home for literally centuries. And so if it is to become something new, how does it go about doing that in a way that does not destroy sort of the historical cultural bond? But I would love to grow, but I'm only going to grow if the budding community of J4, or folks who find some value in the content, help out. You spread the word, you invite folks to come over, you maybe take some of the threads or themes that you have interest in, and you dialogue when and how it makes sense. If you heard something that you perhaps didn't agree with, that you're chopping it up and vibing about that in other kind of circles, and that we talk about content, we talk about future, we talk about the harmony of where we're trying to go, and that we are doing it in a way to where we have sort of self-care and self goals, but also looking forward to future generations, that we're positioning ourselves in the best way possible to raise healthy, grounded, solid, rooted, culturally centered, independent children. That is the ultimate goal of parenting. If you all are on the younger side of that, the parent piece will be in your lap pretty soon. And if you're going to be raising a child with any kind of cultural sense, you got to think about it, and you got to go in there with some certainty as to how you're going to raise them. I imagine many of you all in the biracial space were raised in uncertainty. Parents were just winging it, right? And you are the outcome of that. I'm sure you're a solid, grounded individual. But if we can raise the next generation of Black children from monoracial parents, and the next generation of biracial, multi-generational parents with intentionality, then our beautiful babies will be better for it. All right, I'm getting ready to wrap. Please like the comment. I mean, like the YouTube thing. That helps us. Subscription's a little bit more personal, but hey, if you think this is worthy of your time, give us a subscribe, and then help spread the word. Thank you, jury notification. All right, very true. Echo chamber politics. Brandon Goldensmith. I feel you, Brandon. I would like to talk to someone in your generation. I'm gonna put up my email. That if you're ever comfortable and interested in that, I would welcome a preliminary conversation to see kind of, how we might build the show together, and just learn and hear from your generation some of the specificities, some of the interpretations of it, some questions you might have. But more importantly, where do you see your era and generation going in the very near future? That's the email, ALONZOAJ 1968 at Gmail. It's also in the about section, and if I think about it, I'll put it in the description here. All right. Great discussion. New sub. Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. All right, family. I've taken enough of your Tuesday. Thank you so much for rolling with me on a Black and mixed race musing day. I think I will do this again. If there's a subject matter that you all are interested in, and in terms of exploring, feel free to send that to the email, and I'll take a look at it and see if it's something that I'm comfortable speaking on and sort of teeing up for moderation. All right, beautiful family. Thank you guys so much. Please check out the next video. Again, this is J4 Conversations, talking about parenting beautiful Black and biracial children. Next time we connect, love, 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 y'all. Thank you guys so much.